Alright, welcome in today, guys. This is the debut episode of the Victory Lap podcast. I'm very, very excited to be here with my guy, Nicholas Parks.
First day, we're very excited to be here with you guys, talk F1, all things Formula One racing, talking about why you should get into it, why we love it, all of it.
All of it, yeah. And you brought that up. Why should you get into F1 right now? And I think the biggest thing from this year compared to years past is that the new regulations that Formula One has put in place, the FIA, right? And that's the something agency. It's Formula, I don't know. It's some agency.
We don't care about who's regulated.
Yeah,
we don't care about the rules.
It's the FIA. That's all you need to know. It's like the CIA, FIA, whatever. So the FIA has put in regulations that basically gives every team the same base car at the beginning of the year. And that's huge because, some teams that may be, having lingering regular R&D from the seasons past, modifications that they've made to their car to make it better in seasons past. Now that's wiped clean. Every team's basically starting from the ground up, right?
Exactly, and we're seeing a lot of drivers who before wouldn't be as competitive or even competitive in general, but now we're seeing people like Haas, Kevin Magnussen, competing with people like George Russell of Mercedes, and normally we would have, that would have been unheard of, it would have been a crazy race if that's happening, but this could be something that's going to pick up and everybody's going to be at a competitive level for those top 3 podium spots. Right now we're seeing Ferrari and Red Bull, but once these other drivers get accustomed to the cars and facing against competitive drivers such as Mercedes or Red Bull drivers, their skill is gonna increase too.
Well, yeah, and that just makes the sport, more fun to watch in general. When a majority of the teams on the grid, there's only 10 teams on the grid, 20 drivers total every year. I don't believe that format has expanded in Formula One's existence, but 20 racers, right? 10 teams, like I said, and if you can have competitiveness throughout the grid, that's huge. That brings in, viewership because not only are you having the big fan bases of the teams that are running, the top, but you're also having, some smaller brands start to build a fan base. And I think that's huge for the sport. And to go along with the regulations that they've, made with the base cars and, the standard parts that are given to every team, they've also now put on budgeting controls on, the bigger teams, where it's like the biggest analogy I've, said to you is, it's like baseball. Baseball doesn't have a salary cap, so the Yankees are able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars if they really wanted to, because they're able to bring that much revenue in from ticket sales and just their popularity as a team. Compared to small market teams as in, the Oakland A's, they don't have that same capability. And the same thing has happened in Formula One for pretty much every year up until this year. Every single year, it's been the big teams that have really gone on these stretches, these dynasties, that have just won championship after championship after championship, and then a new team does something different, and then they take over. And I feel like now it's really going to be hard to build, consecutive championships. At least 2 in a row. Mercedes fell off the podium last year, but does Red Bull even win this year? That's a question that I don't think is so certain at all this early in the season.
Especially with Ferrari in front of them right now. But back to what you were saying earlier about the competitive level throughout the whole roster, we're seeing like a race within itself at every level of the track. You got the first maybe 5 positions, Red Bull, Ferrari, a little bit Mercedes currently, as we've seen.
Sometimes even Alpine.
I was just about to say, we were seeing Alpine, they were battling each other in the early laps of the race for who's going to be in first. And that was big too, especially you have 2 drivers driving so aggressively on the same team, but they want to beat each other too. That's another fun aspect of the sport. But we're seeing races happening at the 10th position, the 15th position, all these positions now because everybody's at the same car. So, you can watch a part of every race, and that's how it's not boring because there's action everywhere.
Last race, in Saudi Arabia with Lewis, I believe he started P15, P16. So he got
up to 6, wasn't it?
Yeah, he got up to 6, and he kind of got screwed over by the virtual pit car, or the virtual safety car.
He didn't even have a pit stop until I think it was like lap 37. So he was bound to go in, and lose some of the positions. But he was racing really well, and that was fun to watch him climb the ranks as well.
Exactly, but it was a lot tougher than normally maybe people, not of his caliber. I mean, he's a outstanding driver, 7-time world champion, Lewis Hamilton. One of the OG legends really in the sport. He's a living legend. Kind of like some other guys like Tom Brady and LeBron James, but back to Lewis, right? He did that, and it was not of no immense. It was of immense difficulty that he had to do that, to climb those spots. I mean, it was not easy for him in that Mercedes car, which people have been accustomed to seeing win every single race for the past 8 years.
That, I mean, Lewis is still a fantastic driver, and half the sport was the skill, but now it's mostly skill, and that just shows how experienced Lewis is. He's got all the championships, and that's a tough battle for him to climb the ranks. That's really exciting to see, and that just shows how experienced some of these drivers really are.
Yeah. So if you love drama, if you love fierce competition, I mean, this is a sport that brings it all. And like we were saying, kind of some of the nuances that this sport has versus other sports. I mean, the fact that there's only 10 teams and there's 2 drivers per team, and really your biggest rival, majority of the time, might be just your teammate, because you have the same exact car as him, so you should want to be better than him. And that's just an interesting dynamic, I think, that not a lot of sports have, is that you're on the same team as this guy, and there's a team championship. There's a constructors championship for the teams, whoever has the most points at the end of the season. But there's also a drivers championship. And we've seen in years past, with Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton on the same team in Mercedes for a couple of years straight. I mean, Lewis was the #1 driver in the world, but Valtteri also had to kind of defer to him as well, to let him have some of that greatness and glory. So it's just a really weird dynamic, and I feel like this is a very unique sport that you should want to be interested and get into, and now is the perfect time. So, did you want to go over the races?
Yeah.
Or did you have anything else to add?
I was gonna say, usually the drivers are about the same skill level per team. Like the Red Bull drivers and the Ferrari drivers, Mercedes drivers, they're all driving at the same level. So, like with Valtteri, like you were saying, it's a really, it shows this driver could be in first. Valtteri was being Hamilton in some races, but needs to defer because the reality is that the team's going to have their head driver, the face of the team driver. And that's sometimes the other driver, but the other driver could beat them, Mm-hmm. And so they want to compete too. They want to be the face of the team too. So there's that level of, wanting to win, and sometimes they're not allowed to win, which makes them want to race harder.
And the thing too is that when you get so competitive with your teammate, that can be almost at a loss, and a loss to the team, because you're pushing the car harder than it should be pushed.
Sometimes they crash into each other too. I mean, throw both of each other out the race.
Exactly. So that's not good for the team. The team doesn't want to see that. But yeah, that's I feel like the most interesting dynamic to the sport. And if you guys ever want to tune into Drive to Survive, that's a pretty decent show, but that is the show that really got me into Formula One. And just, following these, personalities of the sport, the drivers, the team managers, and just, seeing the glitz and the glamour that it brings, worldwide.
And it's a great way to, just catch up and get to know everybody, because it's hard sometimes to join a new sport. You got 20 guys to keep up with, you got the coaching to keep up with, so that's a great way to get to know them in a show format. That's easy to see, because the show's really in depth. They're in the pits with them and everything, so you get to really get to know the people. I feel like.
Yeah, it's almost like it's almost like reading a book, like a Harry Potter series or something before you watch the movies. So the characters, you have a picture of what the characters already are. That's what watching this TV show kind of did for me. It's just kind of give a little background on all the characters, all the drivers per se, and then all the team managers, and then really, be able to take that and then, apply it to the real world when I'm watching a race and I see these cars going at fast speeds, you know, down DRS zones and battling G-forces that they really, it's unheard of. It's athletic as fuck, to be honest.
It is.
The G-forces are crazy.
It's like the reaction speed. You're reacting at, I mean, every millisecond in the sport matters. You're reacting behind cars at like 200 miles an hour, you know, and just like the blink of an eye, you know, could be sending you off the track, you know, maybe flipping your car in a crazy case. But
if you really want to know the physics of the sport, you gotta look up real, like regular person in F1 car, and you'll just see, you know, 40% brake pressure, and your head is literally just right into the steering wheel, because you need to have that training on top of like that endurance with your neck muscles and the rest of your body to be able to control the forces. It's really spectacular. But did you want to get into the last two races? Because I know we didn't have a chance to start this before the season started.
yeah.
So starting in Bahrain, amazing race. Can't believe Red Bull had both cars like just retired.
That
it
was
literally lasted laps.
The craziest part of the race, especially because, I mean, lap 57, the last lap of the race, you know, the other car fails.
Yeah, Checo fails after Verstappen did what, 2 laps earlier, 3 laps earlier?
Yeah, I think, a couple laps earlier. Yeah. But Verstappen, again, he was racing very aggressively, you know, trying to pass, which is kind of how he races, which he did in the Saudi Arabia, you know, seemed to learn his lesson, but racing very aggressively, and they said that both fuel lines went out, right? Yeah. Which, I mean,
I don't know how much that is his fault as much as it is just maybe the car's, you know, fault. And that's the standard part, you know, like we were saying, that's one of the standard parts that is spread across all the 10 teams. So it wasn't something like they had modified and, you know, possibly messed up. It was something that had just failed. So that, you know, that could maybe lead me to believe that maybe because he was driving so aggressively, that was the reason why. Maybe the fuel line went. I don't know. But I think like we said earlier, you know, all the teams having kind of this base model car, and the car being able to follow behind the car at you know, an elongated period of time, and not have the emissions, you know, not be able to let them follow as closely. That being eliminated has led to a lot more battles throughout races, you know, and not just at the top levels, at the bottom levels. And I think Verstappen realized after Bahrain, when he went to Saudi Arabia afterwards, that he was like, hey, if I'm going to pass, it's not like I can pass and stay in front of him. It could be a back and forth yo-yo, and maybe just taking a more patient approach instead of being as aggressive. He learned his lesson in Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and just, you know, once he had taken over, he kind of, you know, took over. He wasn't in that back and forth with Leclerc, and Leclerc was putting up a fight as well, no doubt about it. But
yeah, well, he was holding them back pretty well, but I mean, in the first race, Verstappen just kept passing on the DRS, but then he would get repassed on the turn because he'd have to brake too hard, brake too late, take the outside, you know, to get in front. Exactly. And then what we saw in the next race is that he did it once, he did it, and then the next time when he was about to come around the next lap, he sort of slowed down where we thought he was going to fly past again, waited, and then took a smarter pass, you know, during the turn, you know, then was able to stay ahead of Leclerc the last few laps.
And just the way that the track format is in Bahrain versus, you know, Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia is just, you know, in Bahrain, the first stretch is DRS, and then it comes into turn 2, 3, and then into DRS, right? And then turn 4 is coming out of DRS zone. So DRS is where the cars are able to open up a flap if they're within a 1 second gap of the car in front, which is pretty dang close. Usually, I mean, 1 second is like you're like in passing zone, so that's why DRS is 1 second. And it opens up a back flap on the back wing that lets air pass through at a more fast rate and makes the car kind of speed up.
Yeah. And less air resistance too.
Yeah, less air resistance. So, you know, being able to do that and pass, you know, gives that ability. But like we were saying, if Verstappen, normally, you know, in the old days, you'd be able to pass and be able to stay in front, really, usually. Well, now it's so easy to follow behind that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, it might seem like an unfair advantage, to get to fly past, but it's like DRS is pretty balanced out because when you fly past, then you have to brake harder, which means that you need to brake earlier maybe, or you're probably on the outside of the turn. And that's what was happening with Verstappen and Leclerc a lot, is that once you get to that turn, now you have to take the turn slower, If they got the inside route, they're coming in, they're going to start accelerating faster, now they're back in front. So it balances out, you can't just like fly past somebody whenever you want, if you can.
The time that you make up once you pass is really on the turns, or the rest of the race course, really, because if you're in, like, for example, with Bahrain in the first race, if you're going from one DRS and then 2 turns later you're in another one, it's like, why would you pass 2 turns later and then have another opportunity to pass instead of, getting passed again, basically. I don't know, I kind of explained that a little messed up, but if you're going to pass a guy, don't pass him in the first sector, pass him in the second, basically.
Yeah, and especially with the sport where, you're looking at the milliseconds on the time to see who wins, When you do get in front, you need to be racing even faster than you were before, now that nobody's blocking you, because they're going to be racing harder, trying to catch up, and they might have the DRS opportunity. But also, even if you make like one mistake on a turn, because, you're in front, you make one mistake on the turn, lose a couple milliseconds, now they're right back in it.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing too, when you're in first place, you're not able to use your DRS because you're not actively trying to pass anybody. So effectively, like, you will never have that opportunity being in first place. That's why it's such a battle when, second place is on the tail of first place and he has an opportunity to pass and that interaction happens, then he's got to brake harder, like we were saying, and it's all the physics of how these machines are able to operate on the track and not lose traction. Because trust me, it's pretty dang easy. The wheel that I got for a freaking video game, if that's any, a 10% of how hard it is to control a real car on top of the G-forces that you're having to experience and the fatigue of constantly turning, pressing down the gas, hitting the clutch, changing gears, and then trying to balance your strategy off of that and be aware of when to pit and when to pass. It's just so many, influences that can go into it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
but
definitely.
Yeah, as far as Bahrain, very exciting race. Really just shocked that both the Red Bulls though had the fuel line issue, and that allowed Lewis to get a very valuable third place podium. And
Russell was fourth too, so it was Ferrari then Mercedes top four.
And that's huge because Mercedes has been really struggling out the gate. They haven't fixed the porpoising issue, which is something that all the cars were dealing with at the very beginning of the season with the base model that the FIA had regulated. And it basically means the car tilts up and down on straightaways more so than on turns, but it damages the tire and basically
also creates friction that slows down the car too, so it's counterproductive.
It's counterproductive for pretty much all aspects of the car. And Mercedes, being the best team, or at least figured to be the best team going into the season, they, haven't been able to fix this problem. So that's something that they're dealing with, and they didn't really show out in Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, but in Bahrain they were lucky enough with the Red Bulls, petering out to get third and fourth, and that's helped them in the championship. I believe they're second in the constructors right now as it stands. Ferrari, number one, as it should be. My man Charles and Carlos, man, they've been ripping it up. I love both drivers a lot. But this guy over here, being a Verstappen guy, Red Bull guy, it's tough. We're jockeying for the number one position. But like I said earlier, it's so early to tell. And if teams like Mercedes can figure out this porpoising issue, they're going to get faster, they're going to get better. They've got arguably the best driver on the grid still in Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, you really can't tell. I'm a Red Bull guy. I was going to bring it up. But, Verstappen beat Leclerc last race, so I'm excited to see how that dynamic. Perez was racing great too, I'm excited to see what Red Bull and Ferrari, how they turn up in the next race. Also, though, I think that Lewis Hamilton's going to have a good shot, too, with the way that he raced last week. So.
And McLaren has still been struggling at the gate, too. I don't know what their issues have been, but they've got two great drivers in Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris. So if they can figure it out, too, I mean, they were, jockeying last year. I believe they finished third in the constructors, so they did finish, I think, bronze.
And they've been having car troubles, too. I mean, Ricardo, his car broke down. He lost all power. He couldn't accelerate. And late 30s laps of the race. So they're having car issues, too, And, I mean, also, both Leclerc and Verstappen's brakes locked up while they were battling in turns. So, still plenty of problems to work out, too, and that's going to be a big factor for some of these teams, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I also think, too, that just shows the intensity that they're really going. When the brakes lock up, that means that, they overheated, right?
Yeah.
So they can't
that could be driver issue, too.
Exactly. Well, it's not even necessarily a driver issue. It just means, they're pushing the car to literal max to try and beat each other out. And that's just fun to watch as a viewer, for sure. But, bringing up some other teams as well that have, kind of impressed throughout the first two races, like you said, Kevin Magnussen at Haas, pushing his car to the limit for sure. They've got that Ferrari engine, which seems to be pretty fast off the gate this year. Multiple teams, if you guys don't know, teams within the grid can use or buy each other's engines, from their manufacturers. So, for example, McLaren is a Mercedes engine, Aston Martin's a Mercedes engine, Red Bull Racing and AlphaTauri Red Bull Racing is both Honda engines. Haas has Ferrari's engine. Ferrari obviously has a Ferrari engine. And then Alfa Romeo is another Italian company, I believe uses a Ferrari.
Yeah, they do too, I think.
And Williams, that's the other one. Williams is a Mercedes. So Alpine's the last one. They're using Renault, who actually used that team for a long time in Formula One, and they just, I guess, got bought out by a bigger brand and sponsor. They were having issues too. They weren't being as competitive as they could have been, as their history may say. But yeah, that's kind of sad to see Renault, out French car brand company, but they're also an engine manufacturer, and they are Alpine's manufacturer. Alpine's been fast this year too. I mean,
I've been impressed by them. They're battling for 6 and 7 in the race, I think, and they impress us. I think one of their cars did break down. Alonso's broke down. Yeah, so that's another car issue as well. But they impressed me too with the early battles in the race.
Yeah, no, Ocon and Alonso were going back and forth, and they had said after the race in Abu Dhabi that they were completely fine with doing that. The team manager, I forget his name, but he was saying that they were allowing them to race and be competitive against each other, which is something usually that does not happen between teammates. Usually they kind of want to deter away from that because possibly of pushing the car too hard and crashing, or just not being good for the endurance of the race.
Especially right out of the gate, the early laps, like lap 6. I mean, do we really want our drivers, battling this aggressively to be in front, Because really, most of the race is going to boil down to the last 10 or so laps of the race where everybody's trying to get into those final positions. Because, like we were saying earlier, it's just so easy to pass and then get repassed, so...
On top of that, to build off, sorry to cut you off, the other part is to even be in position to win in those last 10 or 15 laps or so. You need to have the right pit stops and be able to endure through certain tire sets throughout the race. I mean, there's usually about 2, maybe 3 pit stops per race, and making some tires last on certain compounds. There's 3 different compound tires. There's the softest one, which is the red tire. There's the medium compound, which is the yellow, and then there's the hard compound, which is the white. And then when they're racing in wet conditions, they also have a wet tire, or basically a full metal jacket tire. I mean, I don't really. Yeah. It's got all the types of grip on it. I mean, it looks like it should be on a lawnmower or something. It's a thick tire. But yeah, I mean, you got to make those tires last, even be positioned to have a shot at passing and winning certain races. Yeah.
That's another great point, and that's another reason why sometimes it's that mix of things, like the tires, and like driving aggressively, you know, like they need to drive aggressively, but sometimes it might not be the right time to do it, which is why all of this planning, you know, they've got so many people, I don't even know how many people, but they've got so many people just monitoring the race and making like play calls and stuff, you know, based on all these car sensors, you know, like how's our car doing on the fuel, how are we doing, or I mean on the engine, you know, or the tires, the brakes, you know, everything, because so much that could go wrong in so little amount of time means so much.
Exactly. So, I mean, looking forward now, there's no race this weekend. There will be a 2-week break between Abu Dhabi and Melbourne, Australia, and you know, we're right in the middle of that. So, kind of just looking forward. I know next week we'll probably touch on it more so, but if Mercedes can kind of figure out some of their problems in this 2-week little break here, could they maybe possibly vie for some podium positions in Melbourne?
I definitely think so with the way that Hamilton raced, and I mean,
George Russell's been impressive. I like George Russell.
I was gonna say Russell, I mean, he's raced impressively, maybe not podium yet, but he's definitely, I mean, a great contender for a 4, 5, 6, you know, and I'm definitely excited to see him race, but I think Hamilton has a shot at podium, you know, if it works out for them.
I think, you know, and I had seen this in the news, just from circulating on the Formula One website, that the team manager at Ferrari said they're not going to fall behind in this R&D war that's really going to unfold to win this championship this season. That's what's happened in years past. They haven't been able to develop as fast as certain other teams, and whether that was budgeting factors or not, I mean, now somewhat of all teams are going to be on the same equal playing level with that. So, you know, we'll see how much Red Bull and Ferrari increase their gap, if to say per se, you know, from the rest of the pack, if they even do. And that's why I think Mercedes is still in that kind of limbo of pushing and vying for podium, because Checo got pole for the first time in his career at Abu Dhabi. You know what I mean? And then through an unlucky, you know, virtual yellow flag, he wasn't able to pit, and he dropped a couple positions, or I think he pitted and then everyone got to pit or something, and then I don't know, he got basically screwed over by the pit car. But yeah, I mean, he was racing really well, and then Verstappen's obviously the reigning world champion. You got Leclerc and Sainz that are both great drivers in a great car. That's 4, you know, of the top positions. How is Mercedes going to fit into that unless they get significantly better? And I think there's still a chance for them to do that, and I'm excited to see how it really unfolds throughout the rest of the season as well.
Yeah, and I mean, even like, I say it wouldn't be fair to count out some other teams for maybe being in the podium positions as well, you know? I mean,
it's just so unique this year.
If McLaren could get like their stuff together, you know, I think Daniel Ricciardo could have a chance to be up in the top 5 positions at least, you know? I mean, Kevin Magnussen was, what, 7th the last race?
Yeah, he's really getting the most out of that Haas car.
I would argue he could maybe get a top 5 position, maybe podium position if he keeps getting better, you know? He keeps driving with these other fantastic drivers who are gonna, you know, make him better, you know? They're gonna force him to drive better than he is in the lower positions, you know? He could compete for the podium, maybe not at the next race maybe, but maybe later down the season.
I think another name too is Valtteri Bottas, former Mercedes driver now at Alfa Romeo.
He retired last race too, so we didn't get to see how he would have ended up, but he looked like he was driving pretty well too.
He finished P6 in Bahrain, right, I believe. And that was obviously, of course, we were always going to add the +2, I believe, just because, I mean, with the 2 Red Bull cars going out the way that they did, just so kind of bizarre. So really, Valtteri finishing 6th was more like 8th, but still, P6 for Valtteri in Bahrain, and then retired, which means the car, you know, just broke down or whatever. That's the F1 term, is retiring. He retired in Abu Dhabi, and he was still good on pace. He was like 9th, I think, or 8th.
I'm not sure exactly what happened either, because I don't think his car just broke down. I think he was slowed a little bit, and he went into the pit, and then they didn't come back out. Yeah.
They retired in the pit.
So they must have seen something
Wrong with the car.
not working to 100% and figured,
But
well,
he's definitely a championship level driver. So he can definitely vie, for some podiums, depending on how some weekends really go. And that's the thing with F1 is that
he's finished first in the past, and he's raced against Lewis Hamilton, for a good portion of his career. He's been so he's got that experience. He definitely can do it. And if they get the car working, I think I said so many times, but
I do know. Yeah, I do know.
But I think that he'll definitely be a competitive player too.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't really have anything else really to add. Go follow our Instagram page, Victory Lap Podcast on Instagram. This will be uploaded to the Stallion Sports Network YouTube, as well as the Edges podcast yesterday. Me and Asher did talking some NFL and NBA. Go follow that as well. Stallion Sports Network YouTube. And we'll get some clips up here from today, but stay tuned for next week. We'll give you a little bit more of a preview on Melbourne. And
we can break down the practice, what we think the race position will be down, break down our thoughts, and have more in-depth discussion.
Yeah, see, kind of maybe some of the strategies the teams will be going into the weekend, and just some other news maybe through the RD community. Seeing, what are these teams doing in this 2-week, little break here. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll be back next Saturday. So thank you very much. And this
Thank you for watching.
Victory Lab Podcast.